Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Now today we're going to be talking about a new lens from Panasonic, and that's their 12mm f1.4. So this is a new lens with the Leica branding. That's kind of what Panasonic's higher end lenses have, that branding. They're co-designed with Leica, which is a very famous German photographic company, well known for their high quality optics. So this is one of Panasonic's kind of premium high-end lenses. It's a fairly wide angle lens, and it obviously has a very wide aperture of 1.4. It's a bit unique in that regard. There's not a lot of micro four thirds lenses with a 1.4 aperture. There's quite a few that have 1.8, but 1.4 is a bit rarer. It'll be usable on Panasonic and Olympus mirrorless cameras. Now we're going to take a look at all the characteristics of this lens, but let's start with a look at the physical design. So the lens looks very similar to their other Leica branded lenses. It's got a nice metallic finish. It's very sturdily built. It feels very good in the hand. Like most micro four thirds lenses, it's not very large, and it has a very basic design. It is weather sealed, by the way. Now on the front here, we've got a manual aperture control ring, which has some nice delineated clicks here, which is very nice. We have a single autofocus to manual focus toggle switch, and in the center we have a large focus ring. Now this is a fly-by-wire focus ring, which is a little bit different than most kind of traditional focus rings, but it feels very good. It's very natural. You can't really tell the difference. I say this because there are some less expensive lenses with fly-by-wire focusing, and it doesn't quite feel the same. It's a little difficult to use in manual focus. That's not the case for this lens. It feels very natural, and it's very easy to use. Okay, so this is a fairly wide-angle lens. Now, remember, on micro four thirds, there's a 2 times crop factor compared to full frame. So if you're comparing this to a full frame camera, in terms of focal length, this is equivalent to a 24mm lens. So fairly wide, not the widest you can get. You can get lenses that go down to 7mm on micro four thirds, but still getting pretty close to that really wide end of the range. This is going to make it very good for anything that you want to get in a large scene, landscapes, nature, group photos, environmental portraits where you have a person in a larger scene. All that kind of stuff is going to be really useful with this lens. Now the main advantage that this lens has is, as I touched on earlier, the aperture. An aperture of 1.4 is very wide, very bright, lets in a lot of light. Now, wide apertures on lenses do 2 things. First of all, they affect shallow depth of field. They give you more of that nice kind of blurry background look, and they let in more light for better shooting in low light conditions. Now on a wide lens like this, the shallow depth of field is not going to be a huge factor because a wider lens has less of that shallow depth of field. You certainly still can get some nice pronounced shallow depth of field with this lens, especially if you're close to the subject and the background is a lot further away, but it's not the main point of that aperture on this lens. Really, the main point of the aperture on this lens is to let in more light. So this lens is going to be particularly good at low light shooting. So anything like indoor stuff, maybe if you're an event photographer or videographer, wedding videos, wedding photography, interviews, anything where you're going to be indoors or at dusk in low light conditions, this lens is really going to be good at that. Now this is particularly good for the micro four thirds system because they could stand to have a few more super fast lenses that are really good in very low light conditions. So that's definitely a benefit for the system for this lens. You know, micro four thirds cameras have come a long way in a very short time, catching up in a lot of areas to some of their other system competitors like full frame, for example. But one area where they are undoubtedly a little bit weaker compared to full frame is in low light capabilities. And that's just because the physical size of their sensor is a lot smaller. Now, I do think that micro four thirds cameras do get knocked more than they deserve in terms of low light, but certainly the more lenses that have very fast apertures like this one will be very useful for any micro four thirds shooter. So the quality of the images coming out of this lens is basically what you would expect with one of Panasonic's Leica brand premium level lenses. It's very good, very sharp photos. The distortion is fairly minimal considering how wide the lens is. I actually think that puts it in a really nice range because it's still wide enough you can get very wide angle shots, but it's not so obvious that you have a wide angle lens. With some of those lenses like the 7mm that I mentioned before, it can be really obvious that you use a super wide angle because you get a lot of that distortion. It's pretty well controlled in this lens considering the focal length of the lens, so that's very good. Overall, very good performance in terms of image quality across the board from this lens. It's also going to be a good lens for video use. Videographers are always looking for nice wide apertures for more low light because they're a little bit more restricted based on their shutter speeds that they can use for video compared to photography. It's going to be good for that. It's especially going to be good for any kind of handheld or gimbal work, because typically for those kind of shots you want a wider angle lens, because wide angles minimize handshake and movement from the lens. So it'll be good for that. I think a lot of videographers will like this lens. One thing that you should be aware of, it is a fairly large barrel of a lens. It's a larger diameter lens than most Micro Four Thirds cameras. If you are using it on a really small bodied camera like a GX85, for example, and you're using a tripod plate like a Manfrotto plate, for example, a video plate, the plate can hit the manual focus ring and block it from turning. So if you are using a super small bodied camera and one of these video plates with this lens, you might need like a little spacer plate or something at the bottom of the camera. It's not really a concern for slightly larger bodied cameras like a GH4, but for the smaller cameras, it's a little bit of a concern. So just bear that in mind if you're going to be using those plates and wanting to do manual focus. Overall, this is a really high quality lens, a very solid build, sharp photos, a nice wide angle, and a very fast aperture. I think it's this lens is kind of indicative of the health of the Micro Four Thirds system at the moment. We're really seeing that Panasonic and Olympus are really starting to release a lot more of these kind of higher end premium quality lenses. To me, that says that, you know, they've kind of hit all the necessity lenses that the system needs. Now they're able to focus on the higher end stuff. I think that's going to start to draw more higher end professional enthusiast level photographers to Micro Four Thirds. Panasonic has released a lot of Leica lenses recently, and they announced a couple more at Photokina. Olympus has done the same in the last year and a half. They've put out a lot of their pro level lenses, and they also announced a couple more at Photokina. I might be biased because I shoot Micro Four Thirds, but I think there's a ton of lens selection for the system right now, and they just keep pumping out more. I think it's gonna get better and better. This lens is just one example of that, but definitely an excellent wide angle, bright, high quality lens if that's what you're looking for. If you'd like to learn a bit more about the Panasonic 12mm f1.4, come into one of our stores. You can test it out, take a look. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane CBD, the Melbourne CBD, and a new one in Cannington, Western Australia. You can also order the 12mm f1.4 on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. Take care.